2025. Looking forward to our administrative opportunity to get together and discuss how we want to kind of set the tone for this year's meetings and case reviews and things like that. So our next meeting will be in person in February on the 26th, the fourth Wednesday of the month will be our new scheduled protocol. And so we have a couple of things to go over tonight administratively. The 6:35 item will wait until we've got the rest of our folks online. We're shy of a quorum right now, but we want to approve 3 months meeting minutes, September, October, and November, and then take an official vote for the placeholder that we had in November when we reviewed a case but didn't have a quorum. So I sent out that discussion plan for COB members to refresh if anyone has any questions. We can obviously discuss that. But then I'll give a brief report out. Mummy's going to give a brief report out, and then we've got some planned administrative discussion items. Thank you to members of the public for joining us. Welcome back and Happy New Year. We look forward to stronger kind of engagement this year and are glad to see you online. So I'm going to ask, okay, no, I can see the attendance. So we'll go ahead to the COB chair and IPA report out first and give Anika and Charles a little bit of time to catch up. So I'll go first. I have 3 items tonight: the status of our COB vacancies, our efforts to mobilize reports, and then discussion about how to handle an annual report. Then Mummy will give her updates, and then we can talk a little bit more about reflections and priorities and community engagement at 7. So as I think everyone is aware, we have 1 non-voting member vacancy and 1 voting member vacancy. We have interviewed several great candidates. We have 2 more applications that came in that we need to interview. And we also have some administrative questions about eligibility of different people for different roles. And specifically, Mummy, I don't remember if we got an answer to the question about the non-voting member.
They didn't meet the qualifications. I just spoke with HCPD about it yesterday.
Okay. So we expect that we'll be able to fill the voting member vacancy soon. But for now, we are still kind of dependent on a quorum. So if we don't get a quorum tonight, I think that will be okay, but we really want to confirm everyone's schedule for the in-person meeting because we need to clear out those voting items and we'll have a new case to review in February. And again, that instance was kind of unusual. It was a case where we didn't have much discrepancy and ACPD kind of agreed that it wasn't going to be a problem to do an administrative review and take an official vote later. So we don't want to do that as a practice. Does anyone have questions about the vacancies before I go to reports? Okay. So a few of you will
quickly jump in, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Selena specifically for really being vigilant about revitalizing our so sorry about the background noise. Our efforts to recruit new members. We've gotten a lot of applications and a lot of great applications. I just wanted to thank you, Selena, for that.
Thanks. That's awesome.
A very night and day difference from very little active outreach and some focused, well-targeted outreach. Selena, it has made a huge difference, and we're really delighted that everyone we've interviewed so far has been very high quality candidates and would clearly offer a value proposition. So we're not getting just random people in off the street. Matt, did you want to weigh in?
I just wanted to say it's very high priority to fill the vacancy, and you guys have done great interviewing and we are getting really good candidates. It's Julie, and it's a process, but it is a high priority. There's specific reasons why at yesterday's board meeting we could not quite get there, and it was out of our control. We're working the process, but I want you to know, for Susan and I and the whole county board, filling the vacancy and both vacancies in short order is a high priority, just so you know that you're supported and on our minds. So
Thank you. We appreciate that. And just for members of the public, there are just kind of different stipulations for different reasons with different candidates. So, it's usually a little bit more than a matter of, did we think they would add value, or they qualified and available? Okay, report catch up. A few of you will have received an email with a draft version of a report you co-investigated or co-led the investigation review of. The packages I'm sending out have a template that's populated with some of the kind of details from the case highlighted for you to check for accuracy and add anything of substance that you all want to. I want you to feel free to add to the template. I think the format that we created is meant to be reusable despite different discrepancies in different case substance. But within that format, please feel free to add and let me know if there's anything you feel isn't represented by that. So we'd like to get caught up in kind of 2 short batches. So by the end of this week, everyone who co-investigated or co-reviewed a case last year will have their first one. And then when we get through those, I've got the second batch ready to send. Selena, I'm thinking that this could be a useful opportunity for you to serve both as a QC and just like, for somebody who wasn't necessarily involved in those discussions, is the information, contained sufficient to get the idea? So we'll go through that process, and if anyone has questions or suggestions in the next week or so, please feel free to reach out. By the end of next week, I'd really like to have all of those requests for all of the backlog of reports out to you guys. I don't think that we'll get them back in that same timeline, especially for those of you who will have multiple to review. But moving forward from 2025, our practice will be that for any new case we review, our goal is to put it online, to give it to ACPD within 30 days of our case review, and then post it obviously 30 days after that. So with those templates, I'm also sending the IPA report, a link to OPR's report, and a link to the COB meeting from that that public meeting. They can be a little bit hard to remember and find which one was which. So I have filtered those out. If there's any other information that will be useful to you in doing those, or if you have questions, again, feel free to reach out. I'm going to be off work all next week too. I'm focused on a couple of these things. And then while you guys do that preliminary review of those case reviews, we're going to pull together a template for the annual report based on some of our discussion tonight, and then we'll circulate that for you all to review as well. I think adding to that report, the template that we had used before, we do want to have, we will have more substantive reflections from 2024. When we put out our previous report, we had only done some training. So now, obviously, having completed a year of cases, we'll have some reflections on that process, as well as some of the policy issues themselves. And then we'll want to capture our discussion today on, 2025 priorities, and just kind of make a more full cross-section of our work visible to the community. So again, everyone will have a chance to review that and add suggestions. I'm going to take notes during our conversation tonight to populate as much of kind of what I hear. But then again, if there's anything you don't feel, prepared to discuss tonight, there will still be an opportunity to add that in. And then again, just be liberal. If there's something else you think the public would want to see in those reports, we can always add more information. Any questions on report catch-up or the annual report? Dave and Jim, you will both get yours tomorrow. So if that didn't quite make sense, don't worry. that's pending.
Sounds
okay.
Good. Thanks.
I will turn it over to Mummy if she's ready, and I'll just say Anika isn't going to be able to join us tonight. So I think depending on when Charles comes, we'll probably have to hold the vote at the end of the meeting. if we get there. So, Mommy, are you ready to give your report out?
Yes, thank you. I'll keep mine relatively brief. I just wanted to give an update on our hiring process for our senior management analysts. We have narrowed it down to a few candidates from our initial pool, and we're going to be doing those interviews, the final round interviews, hopefully next week. So we're hoping to have selected someone in the very near future and obviously get them onboarded as quickly as possible so we can resume some of the administrative things that I've been trying very much to hold up, but certainly not to the extent that Ian was. For example, some of the meeting recordings from our previous meetings and our updates on our website and stuff like that. We have a couple of things that I need to get uploaded on there and tonight's meeting minutes once we approve those. So we get to catch up on a lot of administrative things that need a little housekeeping. And then I want to start doing the gov delivery notifications and things like that, updating our data dashboards and all of that once we get that person onboarded. So just to the members of the community, look to getting a lot more communications from us and getting more up to speed on some of the public facing stuff that we were doing last year on our website. Once we get that person onboarded, which hopefully be sooner rather than later. Other than that, in terms of investigations, we don't actually have much of a backlog from this year. From last year, there was only, I believe, 2 investigations. One of them just wrapped up, and then the other one, we were waiting for the grievance period to elapse on that investigation, and that has since elapsed. So we'll take up that investigation at our February meeting, and then aside from the complaints that we do, we also review CERT investigations. So I actually just wrapped up my first review of the CERT incident that happened back in 2022, October of 2022, a couple of months after it started. So I've done a review of all of the information and the interviews that were collected by the CERT team in that incident, body-worn camera footage, all the reports, and made my determinations as to what, next steps, if any, need to happen. I will put together a report on that and then send that over to you all. But in the meantime, because of just the large number, there's just a lot of information in both of those investigations. I think it'd be prudent to get that information to you all as soon as possible. And I just wanted to kind of give you guys a heads up of what was coming down the pipeline. So I will send out an email, 2 separate emails for each investigation, so you can keep them separate, for the one that will be for February. And then the CERT review, the first CERT review, will be in March. And I imagine also that would be appropriate for the March discussion when we review the CERT investigation. We'll probably start with just an overview of what the CERT process looks like, just for both everyone's refreshment as well as transparency with the public, so you guys can get a sense of what our involvement would be, keeping in mind that that particular CERT investigation took place before our MOU was operationalized. So I wasn't as involved as I would be, as I was in the CERT investigation that was initiated just last month. So it'll look a little bit different, but I'll talk generally about how it looks typically, and then specifically what my involvement was in this particular CERT review. And we'll go from there. And then I believe that we only have maybe 1 or 2 from this year. I think actually just 1 that we did at the beginning of the year, that is still in the process of being reviewed, and haven't gotten a report from OPR on that one yet. They're still in the process of wrapping up that investigation. So no backlog for any from 2025, just a couple outstanding ones from 2024. So I think by the time we finish doing those 2 reviews, we'll be ready for the one that's queued up from 2025. In terms of just trends, because I know we haven't done quarterly reports in a while, because of the staffing kind of limitations, I decided to do combined quarterly reports for the XDEMs. Those cases, those complaints that I don't actually forward to a full administrative investigation. I'll either do those in a combined report. I will do those in a combined report that goes to you all. And then I will do, instead of separate public newsletters to report out those numbers, I think I'll combine all of those numbers and publish them with the annual report, which I'm hoping to publish towards the end of March. So those numbers will be coming out, but just in terms of transparency, so you all kind of have an idea of what kind of complaints we're getting in. We haven't really gotten very many complaints that have risen to the level of full administrative investigation with interviews and that sort of thing. So I think that's a great thing. But it means that I just wanted to make sure that you all didn't think we had a queue of cases from this year waiting to be heard, because that's certainly not the case. So that's what's coming down the pipeline. Selena, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a question for me?
Yes, sorry, kind of a basic question. Could you just remind me of what a CERT investigation is and why it's different?
Oh, sure. Thank you for that. So it's a Critical Incident Response Team is what it stands for, CIRT. And it's basically an independent jurisdictional investigation that happens when there is a incident that involves either a fatality or a serious bodily injury, and it's officer involved. So Arlington is part of a CERT MOU. Various jurisdictions have signed this MOU. It's cross-jurisdictional agreement, such that when a critical incident happens in that particular jurisdiction, they will have people from other jurisdictions come in and do the criminal investigation related to the matter. And then that is the investigation that is then forwarded to their respective prosecutor's office, and they determine from there whether or not to press criminal charges. I would be involved in getting updates and the briefings and all of those things, but I wouldn't be in my capacity involved in the CERT investigation because it's a criminal investigation. I just would essentially review what they've investigated and the product of their investigation. And then from there, I would determine, along with my counterpart, Captain Kim, if we think that an additional information is needed to initiate an administrative interview, or if what the CERT team has uncovered in their investigation through our administrative review doesn't warrant any sort of additional allegations, or we don't need to call the officers back in for any sort of additional questions, because our lens is kind of different in the administrative aspect, right? Like, so you may have a critical incident, and while there may be no criminal charges, maybe there was a body-worn camera activation issue or something else going on that we need to address administratively, and that's probably not going to be the purview of a CERT interview. So there sometimes may be a need to call officers back in, but that is just, based on the circumstances. But that's essentially what the CERT does. And that's just as a result of the MOU that we have signed on to as a county.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
Let me just follow-up note on kind of scheduling those cases. I think getting that information out for us to start previewing is very helpful, knowing that those cases are among, are the kind of more significant range. I told ACPD that I would give them a week's notice, that we'll tell them as soon as we have the case selected, which case we're going to review. But I told them that I would get them our discussion plan a week before, so that if we want to have a meeting with them to get any clarification, we have time to do so. Since Matt is on the call, I will just flag that I said I don't think it's realistic to ask Mummy to have Mummy committed to a timeline like that right now, since we have a staffing vacancy. Just like getting through administrative stuff in December was really complicated because she's right now straddling 2 jobs. So, Mummy, I really appreciate you organizing all of that stuff in advance and kind of mobilizing that for our pre-review. But just like remembering that we're being gracious, she's doing 2 jobs.
I appreciate that very much. I do let ACPD know in advance what investigations we're going to be working on. Albert and I usually meet twice every week, and then I meet with Chief Penn at least once a month. And so when we're looking to, we have a discussion about which investigations to do, because we'll be thinking about which ones are ready for review. So I need to be in coordination with them to know if the grievance process has elapsed, if their report is done, that sort of thing. So they'll usually know what case we're going to do. It just so happens that we have a couple of them ready, so they know kind of 2 months in advance which ones we're doing for February and March. But I met with Albert yesterday and told him which one we're doing for February and then for March. So they're aware of that. But I think in terms of the other materials, your discussion plans, my reports, those sort of things, we just have to stay in communication with folks about, it's a lot of material in these particular investigations. And so we sometimes just those timelines don't work. But I think they understand that too. I mean, we're all dealing with very limited capacity and resources. So
on that note, I think this year we're going to start splitting the cases between the vice chair and the chair rather than me be on all of them. I think we have enough cadence of kind of prep that everyone knows what that process looks like and involves. And Dave, Mummy, and I kind of meet regularly enough that I will have an opportunity to ask questions on anything I'm not co-investigating, and Dave will have the same opportunity. So we both have situational awareness, but wanting, and we'll get to this, I think, in our next section, but wanting to really kind of strengthen our administrative operational efficiency this year and make sure that we can kind of keep things moving. Getting some of these pieces to be smaller in startup energy will, I think, give us a higher kind of productivity rate when we're talking about the paperwork side of things. So Mommy, thank you for that preview. I can't remember if we had anything else or if we're ready to move on to administrative discussion.
sounds good.
Okay. So kicking off the start of the year, we kind of wanted to do this in December, but since we had so many interviews to do, both for the SMA position and the multiple candidates for the COB, we really wanted to prioritize kind of keeping that moving. So I want to take a few minutes just to give the floor to the COB members to talk about, reflections on 2024, what went well, what we could improve, 2025, what our priorities are, and then we'll get into a community engagement proposal that Selena and Dave got together proactively and put together, which I'm really excited about and grateful for. So I'm just going to kick off and say a couple of things. I think 2024 was obviously very busy and demanding. I think especially in the first half of the year, trying to meet twice a month and trying to keep the case review moving was really intense. And on the one hand, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have gotten so much more operational exposure to the different facets of ACPD's work and being able to do that. So I think we all learned a lot last year, but I do think that getting through all of that stuff so quickly had some downsides. I think, obviously that we didn't have like reviewing each case, just for anyone listening, going through all of that evidence, kind of prepping and understanding the specific policies, often for more than one officer and more than one policy alleged policy violation. Building that muscle took a lot of work, and now getting that stuff down on paper is a huge priority for me in 2025. I'd really like to be fully caught up by the end of the quarter, but also recognizing that ACPD, has a period of response to review these things. So that's where that kind of the reporting activities come from. Is I want 2025 to be a lot more visible. I want our body of work to be more visible to the public in different ways. And I think community engagement will address some of that. Obviously, our public meetings are part of that, but getting the case reports and the annual reports, getting caught up is, I think, a really important part of county leadership and the community writ large kind of feeling like this body is coming to a stable maturity. And that's not to say that we don't still have a lot of learning to do. I think we know that there's, another active cert investigation going on right now. We will have, different cases. But so then on that note, one of my priorities for 2025 is to put a little bit more structure to our case review discussion, and kind of framing out, like we built the discussion plan template before we'd done any cases, and then we didn't really have a chance to revise it because we were just churning them out. And now I think prepping the COB to have a discussion that's, focused and constructive, open, but a little bit more organized will benefit us, and address some of the perceptions that I think we're aware of within ACPD officers and leadership. So I think before the February meeting, I'll circulate kind of a draft of what I think that could look like, and I'll welcome candid feedback on that from the COB members. But I think, to me, my overall reflections are, we learned a lot. We got a lot done in 2024. It was kind of a tsunami. Now that we have a little bit more of a cadence, I also want in 2025 our priorities to be, catching up administratively, building that muscle to be a little bit more routine, looking a little bit more organized, and then having time between meetings for meetings like this, where we can reflect and discuss and plan community engagement, talk about data, talk about the policy SME that we want to engage. So I'll open it up to the team if anyone has, I don't think it needs to go in order, but reflections and our priorities. I'm going to capture notes on what you're saying so that I can put it in the report, or put it for you to decide about in the report.
So I'll add a couple comments. I appreciate all of that, Julie. I think that makes a lot of sense. And the only thing I'll add is that I think in 2024, we made a lot of headway. And I think the only way that we made headway in the only way that it can be made, which is literally just sort of struggling through this stuff, spending time with the cases, the complaints, and the OPR and Mummy's reports, and looking at the policies in the context of specific factual context. It takes a while. It takes a while to become familiar with the policy, to see how it's actually used, to see how ACPD interprets the policy. And, that was, we went through whatever, 12, 13, 14 cases or whatever the number was. And there's no other way to do it. So I think we made a lot of progress. And, at times it's a bit of a slog because you have to really look at the case materials. I thought our discussions were good, and I think our relationship with the community and with ACPD is good. And I think there's more that we can do on that score in 2025. We'll talk about the outreach in a minute. And yeah, I agree with you. And actually, personally, for me, I will have a little bit more time because, as you noted earlier, I just retired from my full-time job, so I have more time this year to devote to some of the administrative stuff. And I also look forward to again, this is sort of the ongoing, frankly, difficulty that we as a group, as a COB, with Mummy, or it's hard to have these meetings to talk about issues unless it's a formal meeting, which is fine and makes sense. But we don't meet as a group other than in this format, and that I think I wish we were able to change that. I don't think we'll be able to. And I get it. It all needs to be public, but sometimes it's just difficult in terms of planning. But that's where we are, and I think I'm looking forward to 2025. I think there's a lot of good things we can do as a COB, and I think we've made some good suggestions. I think we made some good policy suggestions that arose out of the cases, and I think keeping the communication with ACPD and doing more outreach with the public will be important to sort of just follow up and to keep talking. Honestly, the communication and the talking piece is really critical. So that's all I've got.
Thanks, Dave. Really, really valuable. Matt.
Sorry, I'm multitasking, but I want to not steal the show with my 1-year-old, but I do want to share that, I caught the end of what you said, Dave, and we keep faith. Keep faith, you guys, that we're trying to help you, and we're trying to get systems, and we're, I appreciate you mentioning communication. I didn't catch everything you said, but I wouldn't be on with my 1-year-old if I didn't care about what you guys are doing. And so, we're available. Susan and I are your liaisons this year. Um, we're going to engage, and I do think, to the specifics of this evening, it's always understandable for folks to miss a meeting or two, but we do have a system where we try, if you miss multiple meetings. I neither begrudge that at all, but what you're doing is super important. So we're paying some attention, and to be fair, there were parts of last year where were more difficult for me to engage more thoroughly, but Susan and I are paying attention and we're trying to engage. And so just keep faith and try to be patient with us, because we want to be with you. So I'll listen, but I probably have like 3 minutes more than I have 7 minutes before I have to help her get to bed. So
Thanks, Matt. Lisa?
Yeah, I'm pivoting a little from the conversation we're having there about communication, although I agree with what Dave was saying. So we had a lot of really great conversations last year, and there were certainly certain topics that came up a number of times. And I know, Julie, that you were taking wonderful notes. And so I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to sort of go through those and sort of pick out those themes. I know, for example, we brought up multiple times concerns about the way that the interviews were conducted with police officers, kind of the way the questions were framed. We had a lot of questions around the way handcuffs were used. I know there were a bunch of different things. So I think it would be great if we could look at those and kind of figure out from there sort of what we want to pursue. And, I'm going to bring up the issue of data. I think that there's an opportunity to look at those things and think about what data the police may be collecting that we can use, or if we can give them suggestions of things they might want to. So that was it. The other thing I'm going to say, which I know we've all said, they really have to change that bias-free police policy. They've got to change it. You cannot create a policy that is so stringent that you're afraid to say anybody violated it. That's a useless policy. So I don't know what we can do about that, but I feel like that's like a really big one. And anyway, so that's it. It would be great to look at, what we looked at and what we talked about, and kind of figure out where the big themes were, figure out how we can use some data. But that one is a big one, I think, with all of us. So
yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm just going to add a little bit of context for what we can do about that, because I think we did come to consensus with ACPD at the end of last year about hiring a specific SME. We had proposed someone, they had reviewed the resume, they had the chance to hear the person speak at a conference and agreed that they were a good fit. And so we really do want to set up that process to kind of co-create. And I don't think we want to go too much into the details of this right this second, but like, for example, there's a procurement out for a contractor who's going to do an analysis of traffic stops, of police data for the county, and we'll get to review, and discuss those things. So part of what we wanted to set up with the subject matter expert is the opportunity to sit and co-create with ACPD, review, again, things like national best practice, specific ACPD needs, our concerns, officer concerns, and really bring that together. So I think we do have an actionable path forward, again, while we're administratively, one arm behind our back. That will just be a little bit slow, but I think that's okay. We'd rather make consistent progress. And then there's Charles. And then to your broader point, Lisa, I just want to say I have captured, I think, a comprehensive, I have listened back to a lot of our meetings. I think I do have a comprehensive list of the things that really recurred or, stuck out to us. And I will highlight specifically in the report those sections, because for the annual report in general, and Charles, I'll recap in just a second. Thanks for joining us. I do think in general, it's important that all of us feel comfortable that what's there reflects our kind of shared understanding and any nuance within our body. Because again, the reason that there's, I think 6 of us right now, or 7 of us right now, there's supposed to be 9, is to capture nuance, right? So we don't all have to agree, but we do want to present everyone's kind of perspective on those different issues that came up. So we'll definitely be able to capture that in the annual report and give folks a chance to weigh in. I think that will guide our 2025 priorities in following up on different kinds of conversations. And again, that's where I think not having such a heavy backlog and the ability to have, a case review or 2, and then a meeting to assess and plan and do these things is going to be really valuable. So thank you for that. Charles, welcome. I'm going to just take one step back and tell you that Mummy and I will fill you in on our COB and IPA report out updates. Nothing terribly critical, but right now we're just kind of sharing our reflections on what went well or what we could improve from 2024 and how we want to use that to set 2025 priorities. So, Dave talked a lot about how much we learned in the process of looking at, the policies in the specific context of factual cases, our building of the relationship with the community and ACPD, wanting to strengthen that, but also looking at the policy suggestions we made. And Lisa was kind of raising that there were concerns or conversations that recurred and wanting to make sure we capture that. So Selena, thank you. Oh, yeah. And then Mummy.
Mummy, do you want to go now? Do you want to go first?
Is there something you wanted to add?
Oh, no, go ahead. I'll go after you.
I was going to add on to what Lisa said. And for me, I think one of our most successful sort of points last year was the policy change that requires reporting if an officer unholsters a gun. And I think that was really significant. And sometimes we have actually like we work the most successfully with ACPD, not on reviewing cases, but actually on a policy change. And I'd like to see us figure out how we can leverage that. And so Lisa's idea of keeping track of what those policy issues are is really good, and figuring out how do we have those conversations with ACPD. And another thing that I thought could be useful to raise is that we're all going on ride-alongs and having discussions for a period of several hours with different officers. And on my ride-alongs, I've heard some really interesting things, some really good practices that we haven't had a chance to raise or talk about. And some of those I think could be really influential if we said, we think this is a good practice. We heard a really good idea. And I'd like us to find a way without, obviously those conversations are one-on-one conversations, and we have to be sort of careful about how we reveal those conversations we have. But it would be very interesting if we had a way to take advantage and sort of capture the things we're learning on our ride-alongs.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. We have talked a little bit about wanting to amass our collective experience. And I wonder if one way to do that in our 2025 priorities, both the policy piece of what you said, because I agree, I think, our ability to co-create with ACPD tends not to be based on one specific case specifics, but where they kind of overlap and where we see recurring things, similar to the, oh yeah, no, that was the data element that you mentioned. So maybe what we can do is set a goal of maybe our April meeting could be to review some of the policies that we have seen with ACPD and kind of prep for that, a different format of a meeting. And then maybe we want to dedicate a segment quarterly of not a whole meeting, but partial meeting to aggregate our experience and talk about ride-alongs. I think one thing we have to be mindful of in that regard generally is that, officer confidentiality is something that they're not sharing that with us as individuals for the purpose of informing these meetings. And so I think aggregating that and being able to talk about it a little bit more generally would make sure that we preserve the trust that we need with the officers to be able to have those conversations. So I'm going to make a note of that. And then what I want to say is, the annual report is where I think we'll capture the reflections. And then as we come to 2025 priorities, we can look at a little bit more discussion of how we want to bring these things to life a little bit more. So thank you. Was that all of your comments, Selena?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, just for now anyways. Mummy?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. I'll start with the RFP process for the traffic data analysis. When I say we had a busy December into January, we had a busy December into January. So during December into January, I was reviewing several proposals that came in from different vendors that submitted bids for the traffic data analysis. And just to refresh people's recollection, this is a separate analysis or a separate project than the bias-free policing project. And sometimes those two get mixed up even internally. Sorry. But they're two separate kind of projects. We were lucky enough to get some funding through CMOs helping us kind of put a request through the county board to do a separate traffic stop data analysis. So in collaboration with ACPD, we are working to select a vendor who is then going to help do a analysis of traffic data from, I think, dating our ideas to go back to 2020 and looking for creating a benchmark as well. When I say benchmark, I mean like where to start the analysis. As you know, Arlington is a very like transient area. And so one of the key questions when you're doing like traffic stop data analysis is like what population of people to compare the traffic stops to when you say things like, how many people, how often certain people of certain demographics are likely to be stopped versus others. You have to have like some sort of underlying baseline for that analysis. I'm sure Lisa could speak about this way more intelligently than I could, but just, putting it in layman's terms, like that's part of the consideration. And then we want to look at things like, contraband hit rate, how often contraband is actually being found when people are pulled over under the suspicion of having narcotics and things of that nature. Looking at the veil of darkness test, like does the time of day impact the outcome of a traffic stop and what happens in those scenarios. So looking at it from a lot of different vantage points. And then another thing that I'm hoping is going to be a takeaway from this analysis is looking at what sort of qualitative data would be helpful to improve the analysis if we were to do like a step 2. But another, big piece of it is what sort of policy recommendations would come out of this data analysis, what sort of training recommendations would come out of this analysis, which I think is a good segue because we've been talking about identifying bias-free policing issues, and some of our bias-free policing concerns are more general, just about like how they're being investigated and how they're being treated and all of those things. And they don't always originate from traffic stops, but there could be a natural kind of overlap in some of this work in that, for identifying there's some potential disparities in traffic stops, and maybe they are related to policies, maybe they're related to individual officer conduct. We don't know what the data analysis is going to show, but we do want to walk away with some tangible recommendations and some next steps. And some of those next steps may kind of segue into what we'd be looking to do with the bias-free policing work, which is to identify an investigation protocol, but also to identify where there are gaps in policy, where there are gaps in training, so on and so forth. So I'm hoping that like all of these things come together in a holistic way. But I did want to just note that the RFP process is already underway. We've selected a few of those vendors to go to the next step, which is an oral presentation. And that's going to happen, I believe, the second week of February. And so once we have that vendor selected, will finalize the, the RFP process and the contract. And then I expect that project will take at least 6 months or so, because first they're going to have to identify what data we have. There's going to be stakeholder meetings. They're going to have to clean the data. Then we're going to go into the analysis, and we'll have interim meetings about what those things are, what's coming out of those interim kind of analysis as we go through the project. But certainly welcome. It might be a good opportunity to select, 1 or 2 people from the COB who are particularly interested in doing that work, to be a part of those meetings as we go through the analysis, to see kind of where things are shaping up, and if there's any feedback or input about things that we need to focus on. Separately from that, with the bias-free policing expert, in my conversations with the county manager's office, and seeing that, we had originally thought about it as, we need to definitely identify some better investigation protocols, but also recognizing that by identifying gaps in protocols and potential gaps in policies and training, we're going to want to address those things. And so we want the person who's selected to be able to deliver on part 2 and 3, and, whatever the whole iteration is of the project, which means that we couldn't just select one specific vendor, because there's caps on how much you can hire someone for without doing a formal public bidding process. And so we decided that rather than selling ourselves short, it would be better to do a formal bidding process for that project as well. So we're working on writing up the RFP and scope of work for that. That's with the county manager's office right now. So hopefully that will be wrapped up soon. And then we'll go through a similar selection of looking at any vendors that apply and seeing who would be the best fit for that. So a little bit more of an administrative hurdle, but I think it's good in that it will give us more flexibility in how much we can spend on a project like this, instead of being constrained to $10,000. And then the last thing I wanted to just add was in terms of policy. So that is also something that I am tracking, all of the policy recommendations that I've made in my report, that the COB has made in our meetings. Those are things that I think are very much things that we should be reflecting on when we're thinking about end of the year reports, pattern and practice evaluations, things like that. But I also think that this is something that the person who fills this vacancy would help to kind of spearhead as well, because we added a policy analyst element to the position. That's how we got it reclassified from a regular management analyst to a senior management analyst. And the idea there is that, we talk about all these recommendations in these meetings or in these reports. We want someone to be taking lead and making sure that those recommendations are actually implemented and being in partnership with ACPD. And obviously we'll all still have eyes and ears on it, but someone to actually be sitting in on those meetings and providing input, working in tandem with the policy folks over at ACPD to help kind of execute some of these ideas that arise out of these investigations. But the vision is also for that person to have a proactive lens. So what we're doing in terms of recommendations, I view as more reactive. It's coming out of an investigation or an incident. Ideally, we want to have someone who is looking at these things proactively, looking at policies. As ACPD is going through certain certification processes, there's like a second set of eyes there from a civilian oversight lens, lending expertise, lending some recommendations, lending some insight, so that my thinking is that the more proactive work we're doing, the more work we're doing on the front end, the better equipped officers are, the better the relationships and the interactions are in the community, and hopefully less complaints. So less work for us to do on the reactive side, more work on the proactive side, I think should be the goal of civilian oversight. And I think it just gives us more capacity to work, on the front end in tandem with ACPD. So hopefully, I say all that to say, filling this position will help kind of spearhead a lot of the work and operationalize a lot of the initiatives that we discussed last year.
Thank you. Super valuable overview. Does anyone have questions on any of the things Mummy just went over? The traffic study, the bias-free policing RFP, or the senior management analyst policy tracking? Okay. So I'm capturing some of our 2025 priorities as we're discussing them. does anyone else have reflections on how last year went, good or bad, or what that might inform for us in 2025? Otherwise, next up is our community engagement proposal that Dave and Selena met proactively. Speaking of proactive and totally voluntary and extremely appreciated. I'll just say before we do the, Charles, we moved the approval of the prior meeting minutes. So we've got September, October, November we'll vote on, and then the administrative vote from last one. So if there's anything you need to review on that, we sent those in emails just as attachment, but I think everyone got that earlier today.
Yeah.
Okay. Well then, Selena and Dave, are you guys ready for me to turn it over to you?
Sure, Dave and I didn't exactly rehearse how we were going to do this, but can I share my screen? Looks like I can.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you guys see this?
Not yet. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is purely a draft. We want everyone's comments, and Dave also please jump in. But we wanted to do an event to talk about how the COB is working, and just give information about the COB and invite members of the public to provide feedback and comments and ask questions. And so we were thinking about doing this in February or March, like on a weekday evening. Some of the places we thought to do it would be like the Arlington Public Library, the Walter Reed Community Center, or somewhere in Green Valley. We want this to be COB organized. We would do outreach with civic associations, the NAACP, community members, the COB listserv, and churches, and any other ones, other ideas that people have. We thought it would be about 90 minutes. And so what we thought we would do is start, like as the run of show, having Mummy give an overview of the COB statute and policies guiding the COB, and how the IPA and the COB work together, and IPAs work with the ACPD. And then Julie would speak next about how the COB is working, who's on the COB, sort of an overview of the cases that we reviewed in 2024, and challenges and opportunities for the COB. And then we would have a time where we'd request some specific responses and comments. So we'd give an opportunity to ACPD, to county board members, and the NAACP, and then we would open it up to an audience Q&A. Dave, did I miss anything here?
No, and you know, the basic drive here was to connect with the public, to make sure they know what we're doing. You know, as Selena said, to give them an overview of what we've done last year, and to make sure that we invite the key stakeholders that are part of this process, you know, ACPD, obviously, and the county board, and key community groups, one of which is NAACP. But I think the idea was that we would sponsor it or organize it and invite people, so that, as opposed to co-sponsoring it, like it would just be COB. And really, the point is to educate people about what we do, to hear what is on the mind of whoever might come. And I just think that, you know, we did one, it actually says the first, we did one, Selena, before you were here, which was followed a somewhat similar format. But I just think it's, and Selena agrees, I think we all agree, like this is something that's important to let the community know that what we're doing. And yeah, I mean, I like the basic overview. I'm willing to play any role. I mean, I'm happy to be moderator. I'm happy not to be moderator. I think the key is getting all the right people there, having a brief, you know, presentation, and then hearing from folks. And yeah, I think it's time, you know, for us to get out there and do this.
I love this. I think this is a really great proposal. I think it's well thought through. I think us sponsoring it kind of solely is probably much more important in the beginning of community engagement activities than later, where partnerships will be valuable. But I really love all the thought and ideas that went into this, and Yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, this is really great, and I appreciate all the work you guys put into it. I know we've all wanted to do a lot more community stuff, so it's great to see that we're starting to move in that direction. The only thing I would suggest is for us to try as much as we can to get information out to groups that wouldn't, usually see or know that we're having something like this, like maybe through religious organization, maybe through churches or synagogues or whatever, PTAs. I mean, it's just, I worry sometimes that we're going to end up in a silo where we're all, talking to the people who are most interested in this, and somehow we're missing some, like, parents and other just families and just people who might be interested. So I don't know how we would do that.
Wasn't there a list that the county had when we talked about this like a year ago that they gave to us that could be a starting point for our messaging?
Yeah, we did have yeah, you guys, you and Julie put together a list as well. Do you guys remember? You guys put together a list.
I have a very long list that includes, so Arlington maintains a list of affiliated community organizations. So we went through that because they're not all relevant stakeholders necessarily, right? Like some of them are more industry focused or certain types of things. So we went through and culled, I think, what looked like the right cross section. We tried to identify a point of contact for every civic association unsuccessfully, but we did amass some. And then a couple of others. So I definitely have that list. Selena and Dave, I will send that out to the group because I don't know that we had the SharePoint as organized then as we do now. So if it's not there, I definitely have it. And I'll share that with you. But I'll say I don't worry about us ending up in a silo because Selena's efforts to just promote anything we're doing more than I was not promoting anything we were doing before has already revealed itself to be effective. So I think you guys getting together is a great sign. I'm really excited about this. I think it's definitely overdue, and now that we've got some breathing room, this has been something we've talked about at least 4 meetings on, something that's a priority for all of us, just having the capacity to triage it amongst other of our own and some externally encouraged priorities. So really great work, you guys. I think this is an excellent step forward. Charles?
Yeah, it's an outline. What I like about it is it's simple. It recognizes what 90 minutes can do, and it's something it's replicable. Things that I could see adding and maybe deleting from it. For the run of show point 3, I would actually have a walkthrough of how folks can submit either commendations or complaints, because we have both on our system. So I'd have a walkthrough of that because we've already, talked about how we work and how they can help us. I would actually pull out that challenges and opportunities as maybe a 3rd bullet point and walking through the system as a 4th bullet point. Why? Because that part, I don't think we want to lose. That's major for this community engagement, how the community can support us. I have some thoughts, and I guess maybe at the end of the meeting we'll talk about more about 2025 and stuff and some of the challenges ahead, because that's what I got from our email things that we were talking about. So I do have some thoughts on some of the challenges ahead. But knowing, them knowing how they can help us with some of those challenges and opportunities ahead, I think would be good. So I'd almost put that as a point. And and recognizing the fact that we have 90 minutes and I just added stuff in, what would I then take out? The request responses from ACPD, from county board members, from NAACP or other groups. I see the benefit of that, but perhaps in this meeting, that may not be, that could be something that we can do at a different meeting, in a different type of meeting, because I think the focus that we're building from 1, 2, 3, and the new 3 and 4, or pulling out 3.3, which is a challenge and opportunities, and 4, hey, how do you submit? I think that is meaty enough, and I think we will have put a lot of dust in the air where there'll be a lot of questions about what we do and how we do. There'll be a lot of questions from that data being shared and the type of cases. So adding in request and response, I don't think that that for the 90 minutes we have, that may just muddy things and may change the nature of how folks feel comfortable about what they ask or what they share. And it may also kind of muddy the trajectory of what we're trying to really get out of it, which is an introduction of us and the community and our partnership with the community. Just a thought.
Thanks, Charles. I want to expand and reinforce some of what you said. I think that a walkthrough of how to submit complaints is really valuable. And Selena, I might suggest that we make that a third person where once we've hired the senior management analyst, because, for example, when Ian was in that role, he was taking in complaints, familiarizing the community with who they might be talking to, and that there is a person who can, help facilitate those intakes, I think could be a valuable add, just to kind of demonstrate what team we have and those sorts of things. The second thing I'll reinforce, or I'll add and expand, is that if once we get the details of this nailed down, we want to make challenges and opportunities for the COB something that somebody else from the COB wants to attend and lead the discussion on. I certainly don't think that the community needs to hear from me as chair. I'm happy to take on, the attendance as part of those responsibilities, but I really want to make sure that everyone kind of has an opportunity to be seen and heard in talking through this work. So once we get more details, we'll make sure there's another opportunity for folks to decide if logistically it's suitable and expand that opportunity. And then the last thing I'll say as a request is that as we look into the logistics, it might be worth trying to prioritize doing this somewhere that can record the meeting for us, because I think what you have outlined here for both Mummies and my talking points would be a valuable clip to put on our website separate from the county board's YouTube channel, where, like, if folks are trying to get a sense of this, that is a very reusable, important message of just like the ordinance, the stat, like all of this stuff, just getting that if we're going to do it. And then my last thing was going to be, I agree with Charles that I think the response from ACBD and them might be better suited for a different time. But that, they can be part of audience Q&A. Obviously, it will be open to the public. So those were my initial thoughts. Lisa, I saw you had your hand raised, and I'm sorry for going on so long.
No. I think I'm agreeing with what you're saying, and Charles did a better job of articulating where my concern was, which is, and again, we don't have to beat a dead horse, but I do see the point of the county board and the NAACP, but that is the piece that felt like it closed off the conversation in some way or shaped it in a particular way, which is why I was like, let's try and make sure that we're, reaching, churches and Knights of Columbus and PT, just places that don't usually, because that's when I worry that we're just all talking to each other, right. But anyway, so thank you, Charles. You said it much better than I was saying it. Not to say this is not wonderful. And I also loved your suggestions of walking through how people can give us information. So A+ for Charles.
As always, I also just want to reinforce.
Does that make up for me being tardy for class? That A+.
That's right. If you're going to be tardy, at least have good answers.
We're agile. We're glad that you're here. I think also, there's nothing planned in that conversation that should really need a formal response. I think when we get into this habit and build this muscle of like hosting public forums, maybe that like for a policy analysis discussion, that maybe we want to have that in a different, like, I don't know how this will work over time, but if we're going to talk about, for example, some of the issues that have recurred, certainly it would seem important to, invite ACPD to participate in that conversation. But since the agenda here is more informational and kind of basic, I think we could probably do without that. So I don't need to feed a fed horse.
Yeah, no, actually, I agree with that too. And I think maybe the goal of the second half of the meeting is to engage the public.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are all good comments. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how to raise my hand when I'm presenting. But just to say, totally agree. And, Lisa, your comments are really good. We were trying to think about how do we get sort of not the usual suspects to come, which is why we wanted this to be like we preferred somewhere in South Arlington. I think a critical consideration is something that Julie brought up, which is we don't have a lot of infrastructure. And so we need a place that has a PowerPoint projector and microphones and internet connections so that we can record this. So that, sort of leans us more towards the Arlington Public Library. But I think, and again, this goes to my next question, which is probably for Mummy. Like, I'm willing to do some of the legwork on this. I think Dave is as well. And we'd love whoever wants to work on this with us to get involved. But we should probably have a conversation at some point about some of the basic logistics and how we're going to manage that. And the only other thing I wanted to say, Lisa, your comment about PTAs, and this is probably a question also for Jim. This is the one place where I have completely struck out on community engagement. Done pretty well with civic associations, with churches and mosques, etc. I can't get any single PTA to post anything about the COB. And if anyone has ideas on how to break that roadblock, they basically write back to me, if they write back and say, we worry about the school and this is not in our purview.
And I think that that's fine. I mean,
Okay.
it's trying. It's like, we tried, I mean, I'm sorry they feel that way, because I can't believe that parents and families, this is not an issue for them. And obviously the schools are the places where you get to the parents and the families. So I'm really sorry they feel that way, but we just have to try. And so if we've tried and they've said we're not interested, but again, Jim may have some ideas, not to put him on the spot.
I am very purposeful when I reach out to the PTAs, and in the few years I have participated in less than a half a dozen PTA meetings. So that's me saying I don't know how to break that barrier.
Well, I think
I don't.
is important. The effort is really important, right? Like that we're trying to be creative, that we want to think outside the box of who might be interested in these things. We will try again later, we can be cyclical about this. It doesn't have to be later this year, but it also may be that as we get to specific activities, like reviews of specific kinds of policies or conversations from ride-alongs or whatever, that we identify things that may, be more relevant to a specific subset of that community group cross section. So I'll circulate that to the whole group in case folks, again, want to volunteer that they know someone in those groups or know how to get in contact with someone in those groups. And I think we can have, I think one thing I'd love to make a goal for 2025, and maybe this switches us back to closing out that conversation on 2025 priorities, is that for part of the reason that I want to put some structure to our case reviews is that, we want there to be as open of conversation, as much conversation as we need to come to a consensus on, or to come to a meaningful vote on the outcomes, but also wanting to be able to have meetings that we can get to a couple of other things. So if we plan this event, we can look at, the folks and have 5 to 15 minutes on the agenda for community engagement updates, right? Like we don't need to have a whole meeting for all of these things, and we can kind of circle back to them. So I'm really grateful for you guys putting that together. I'm really excited about it moving forward. I think everyone's relieved to feel like we have some direction in community engagement. It's the number one thing we've heard from the public is that they wanted more community engagement. So we've got our backlog clear. Charles, I do think that maybe the rest of the group had a chance to reflect on 2025 priorities. So if there's something you want to add.
Jim hasn't yet either, I don't think.
Jim,
Yes.
after you.
Yeah, I honestly, everyone had wonderful points. As I reflect on 2024, what sticks out most is the difference, actually the balance between difficult conversations and more positive. I felt our meetings and case reviews, we had very serious cases that were frankly very difficult to talk through in the matter of a few hours. And I'm just I've constantly reflected on that, and there's a few that stand out more. And I think that I don't know, I'm struggling to see where we had more positive impact than difficult conversation, I think is the point, and one of those sticking points. One of the main frameworks I think that we wanted to work through was a bias-free policing, and it was a very circular, it was and continues to be a circular conversation, as Lisa highlighted. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. I think I agree that I think that, putting some structure to those discussions, or a little bit more structure, I'm hoping will help us balance, what are some necessary difficult conversations towards, that positive outcome and collaboration. So I'm really eager to get folks input on this. I know it's been kind of an outstanding priority. So Jim, thank you for kind of magnifying that aspect of last year's work and what we could prioritize improving this year. Thanks. Charles? Oh, mute. Charles, you're on mute. Charles, can everyone else hear Charles?
We can't hear
No.
you.
Charles, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was saying you did mention that you had some step back on the agenda just real quick because it popped into my mind. You mentioned that you had some good feedback from some of the religious organizations, churches, synagogues, or mosques, and all that. I know that in the past, when we were looking for a host that had seats and had possibly parking, good location that people knew about, and already had a community and could record churches or mosques or synagogues because they had the equipment that they would use for their particular services. So with that, it's more so one, finding one who would host, and then usually kind of negotiating the proper, if their staff would be along to power that. But that's one option out there. But I would lean on that.
Do you know one that would be in South Arlington? Because Dave and I talked about.
In a minute you said that, I was like, she's going to say, do you have one in mind for South Arlington? And the one I'm thinking isn't in South Arlington. But I do know that another one that we worked with, I know the NAACP worked with in the past, and that definitely was in South Arlington. But I'm not sure which of these two churches it was. I didn't want to say the name of it because I was like, oh, maybe I'm wrong there.
Do you mind looking for it?
Let me think on that for a bit, because I bet it's something could be done so that at least you could ask and see, that's a good thing. So on the end, on that end of spiritual life, and kind of where my comments were for really like a 2025, because one thing I love about this board is, at the time I was the new one. Thanks, Selena, for coming. But at the time I was the rookie on the All-Star team, and and it was cool to come here because you all were just so very vested. It's like, wow, they put together just an All-Star team. It's great to be part of that, because it was people who got it. And like I was saying, it just reminded me of, on the spiritual end of it, the words of King, that, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable, that every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. And you all, you got that. And you knew what this role would be. And as each of you pointed out in the comments since I was here, and I'm sure earlier that, that's what we've experienced in doing this role. We've seen it. We've seen the sacrifice. We've seen the suffering. We've seen the struggle in getting the changes done. So I knew that you all would very well cover the things from 2024 and see them as I saw them. So a lot of what I was thinking about was the stuff that was coming down the road, because you all already articulated, the struggles and that we see from the Oversight Board for continued policing policy changes, county code adjustments that could be there, state laws that could support our efforts that aren't there yet. So I was like, well, when I think of 2025, it's really understanding that we really are at just such a critical moment in the ongoing fight for justice, transparency, and public safety. And in the past year, we have made many small but meaningful steps towards reforming policing. Sometimes, a lot of times, hand in hand with police and county. Sometimes, dragging them along a little bit, but always pointed in that direction of building that community trust that ensures law enforcement serves all people equitably. But here we go, a week or so ago, it just became that more obvious how at levels beyond our county, that progress is threatened and may trickle down. So a lot of my thoughts were about, well, what we have to be prepared for, in 2025, and concerning shifts in federal policy, decisions that could weaken accountability, decisions that could erode community trust, that could undo hard-fought gains that we've made in our county, just trickling down from the federal level, and how we have to stay vigilant and informed and unwavering in our demand for just policing. So, one thing to think about is police accountability and disciplinary transparency. So, and we know that, if we even have one officer engaged in misconduct and there was any sort of delay in that justice, the justice might as well be denied. So we have to keep pushing for our auditor and us as a board to have the same powers as we see in other community oversight boards, that we see in other auditors across the country. And Mummy talked about this, moving us more from reactive to giving us the power and review and recommendation, to giving us those powers that other similar boards have and other similar auditors have, to be proactive, to ensure that folks are held accountable for necessary policy changes on the front end, that we're not just in review at the back end. Second, community-based crisis response. We've seen this. I mean, we've talked about this, Jim, in some of the cases that you've said that stood out to you. I know some of the ones that stood out to me. It just too often the police are sent in to handle mental health crises that require enhanced training that would better equip them for that. And we just need to make sure that funding for crisis intervention teams that prioritize de-escalation and not criminalization, that's there. And we see that again as funding could dry up, and that would trickle down from the federal to the state to the county. So how can we as a board help hold that line? Third, AI surveillance and predictive policing. For all the benefits of technology, there are drawbacks, and we see the race towards AI and integrating AI and predictive models from AI just growing and growing. And I have no doubt through 2025, we'll see that emphasis from the federal government trickling down, and perhaps more funding towards those type of things and trickling down. So we know from the stats out there that these tools disproportionately target communities of color, increasing over policing under the guise of technology. Technology did this. So again, we must demand transparency, strong oversight, and community control over how those tools are used. We can't ignore federal policies right now that would also weaken police training standards. That's part of, some funding that could be threatened and by eliminating national training programs. So if that does happen and the federal government wants to retrench itself from setting those general standards, we have to make sure that at our state level, At our county level, we maintain strong local standard programs for the training of our officers, especially in de-escalation, anti-bias strategies, ethical policing. Selena, you talked about some of the great ideas that we, hear from our officers during the ride along. I remember in one of my ride alongs, a great conversation, about recruiting, about efforts that could be made to enhance our diversity, equity, and inclusion. And unfortunately, for many reasons, more politic than not, DEI has become synonymous with things that it is not. Things that it is not. And it's up to us to make sure that we stand strong, knowing that diversity, equity, and inclusion does mean merit, excellence, and innovation. That's what it means. And no one can disagree with that. At the same time, federal policies are limiting civil rights investigations. That we have to be very steadfast about. We've already heard that the Justice Department is scaling back some of the civil rights investigations it's looking at, and that could let certain police misconduct off the hook. As a police oversight board in 2025, if Washington won't hold folks accountable as a police oversight board in 2025, we have to make sure that we still hold the line and our community still holds the line on holding ourselves accountable to the standards that we want, even if the federal government wants to abrogate its role. And finally, coordination between local police and ICE. It's deepening fear in our immigrant communities. It's deepening our fear beyond our immigrant communities, because we're all a community here in Arlington. And when people are afraid to report crimes, we all are less safe. So to the extent we can, and that we are able as a community oversight board, talking about what our goal is, which is community trust in policing, making sure we're there as a voice, that we're pushing back against policies that turn local officers into immigration enforcers, or and that we reaffirm that our cities are communities that are safe for everyone, regardless of the immigration status, because that is part of what builds community trust with policing the crimes that our local police should be and are at this moment focused on. So the other thing, and I'm mindful of our time, is when I think about 2025, I have to say, our local police department does do a good job. So you heard all this stuff and say, oh, there's so much worry, is our police department falling apart? No, they do a good job. We see such a minuscule of all the interactions that the police have. We see such a minuscule amount, and we should be, and it's a blessing that we do. And our police department does a very good job of telling, the local papers of all the good they do, the outreach programs, the holiday gift collections, the coffees with the cop, and that's all good stuff. That's all good stuff, but it is also true. It is also true that with, every good record has a B-side. For all of us who remember what records are, there's the A-side and the B-side of the record, and what songs got dumped on the B-side of the record. But there also is, a B-side of that record. But I know how good we are, so I know we can do better. So you told on yourself, could you do so good, Arlington? So when you misstep, that's why it hurts, because we know you could do better. And I remember, as you all do, some of those missteps. Some of those could be better. Some of those dead wrongs. I remember them. I remember children being handcuffed during a routine traffic stop. I remember a delivery man being stared down the barrel of a gun for being falsely thought of for stealing snacks. I remember a longtime community resident falsely accused while simply returning to the front steps of their own house. I remember a bereaved family unable to bury their son because of policing work that should have been done better. These stories must be told too. We cannot let the only stories be told be the ones about coffee with the cop and how many presents were gathered at the end of the year to give away. Those are good stories, but you told on yourself. You told that you could do better. You told you could do better, and I expect you to. So these stories have to be told because they recognize the full picture, both good and bad, that we have come far. But more importantly, we have further to go and that we can do better. So 2025, we've come to you, right? We must stay engaged, we must speak out, and we must ensure that public safety means safety for all without discrimination, without fear, and without injustice. That's what I'm thinking about when I think about 2025. Because I know you all got 2024. So that's why I just wanted to speak about 2025. And I know you all are going to be there with me, auditor and my fellow board members. And I know the community is going to be with us. I do. That's it. That's it.
Thank you, Charles. I think we do have a lot of important work in 2025 specifically, and I really appreciate you kind of previewing how different changes can impact us in different ways, from federal funding to state laws to, local activities and priorities. I think, we all know that it is our job in accountability to hedge the worst events, right? The bad performances, and not let ourselves off the hook for being overall pretty good, right? We are accountable to, our mistakes. And I think one thing we have talked about since the inception of the COB is that our work, it's important that we're informed by national best practice and looking at what others do in order to learn from them, good and bad, and then tailor to the Arlington community public safety need. And so I really appreciate that in your thread, there's a very strong recursive message on community trust, maintaining public safety for everyone. And I think we've got lots of opportunities administratively, conversationally, and engagement to reflect back to the community that, our work here is focused on Arlington. And making sure that we decide how we're going to conduct ourselves and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. So I really appreciate your remarks. Thank you for taking the time to really think about what we need to be forearmed about in 2025. And I think we'll have lots of opportunities to kind of delve into some of those things you talked about very specifically. But like I said, I've captured kind of everyone's comments, and I'll reflect those back to you all in the annual report, Charles. I think we can address that in our look ahead so that we can be accountable to ourselves for, all of those specific things you mentioned. I think we're all trying to keep pace with the changing role of technology, good and bad, or good and unknown. And again, being intentional about what choices we make. What is our level of risk threshold? What is our level of, evidence, required? So I'm really, really looking forward to working with this group again this year. Mindful of the time, I'll say we have two more things on the agenda just to give everyone a preview. The votes, which is actually two things. We're going to approve previous meeting minutes and make an official vote on the administrative vote we held in November, and then public comment. So before I transition to those things, just with that in mind, I wanted to stop and see if there are any kind of closing remarks or thoughts on reflections on 2024 or priorities for 2025. Mummy, kick us off.
Thanks. Actually, great a segue because it's kind of a little bit of both. I echo a lot of what you all said, and I really appreciate your comments, Charles, about just kind of like stepping back and holistically talking about like why the work that we do matters. Behind the scenes, I try to do a good job of kind of curating the investigations that we review. And that process has, evolved from the time I started to now in terms of, even creating additional classifications, which I think we had Captain Kim report out on the meeting before the last, just with some of those cases that don't make it to this particular meeting setting where we're talking about it in a full investigative sense. And so I can understand why, sometimes it feels like we're just having a lot of difficult conversations and not necessarily a lot of positive ones. But, I think it's important. I think the step we took to start amplifying that the majority of complaints that we get are actually resolved in a way that an officer is exonerated. And I'll continue to amplify that, in public newsletters and during our meeting times and in our quarterly reports. And so the ones that actually make it to this meeting setting are the ones that, required a more full administrative investigation with interviews and that sort of thing. And actually, it was interesting. I was just talking to Captain Kim about this last time I met with him, because I was reflecting on what I said earlier, in that we don't have, I think, as many queued up investigations as we did when we first started. I think part of that is, we are kind of really figuring out our role and our priorities as a oversight agency and things that we want to focus on. But there are still a couple of investigations, for example, that we did even last year or the year before, that we exonerated or not sustained. And we could very easily say, well, since it's not one that we have a dispute about, or it's like a hot button issue, we're not going to do those as a COB at the meeting. But I think it's important for us to do those still, to highlight instances where we are actually amplifying that we, fully agree with ACPD or OPR on their findings, or we do find that the officer's conduct was within policy, and highlighting some of the positive things that we've seen happen, I think is important, just to create that balance that you were speaking to, Jim, and that, like, it's not all difficult conversations. Aside from that, I think just as much as we're amplifying areas of opportunities, we need to, as the kids would say, keep that same energy when there are positive things that officers are doing. So I really liked what you said, Selena, about highlighting positive things that we're seeing on ride-alongs. I've personally written commendations for officers when I'm looking at body-worn camera footage and see something positive that I really like that an officer did that went above and beyond. Like, I will write a letter specifically addressing that officer's conduct. I've asked the chief to include us on invitations for promotion ceremonies, so that we can, be there in good times as well as times where we think we need to have these difficult conversations. But every time a bias situation comes up, I'm not going to shy away from having that conversation. We need to continue to have that conversation, even though it is frustrating, it is circular, and I totally understand those concerns. But until it's addressed, until it's changed, we have to keep addressing it. And unfortunately, sometimes, not just related to policing work, but criminal justice work, social justice work, it's that you have to keep making a case for something before it changes, because this is kind of more of a systemic thing than just a particular language and a particular policy. We're talking about how it's addressed. We're talking about the policy, we're talking about the discipline, we're talking about the culture, we're talking about the impacts of it, we're talking about training, so many different aspects that this particular area touches. So it's probably going to be a long, arduous conversation. It's going to be, a process, and a lot of difficult conversations. I think those conversations, though, have led us to a point where we're all like, okay, it's clear that this needs to be addressed, and all of the stakeholders are now engaged and at the table. So sometimes just the road of getting there is frustrating and it is circular, but we have to get there some way or another. So I think that's just one of those things, and there will be issues like that. But I think by and large, I agree with Dave. I think you mentioned earlier that the relationship has really grown leaps and bounds to us having these difficult conversations. So that's a plus side. They're not always the easiest things to do, but I think through having these conversations, we've been able to identify areas for us to collaborate and work together to address the issues. And so I think that I hope that we continue to build on that and find ways to, just channel that energy productively. And I think it's just about the lens that you're looking at it, right? And knowing that all of the difficult conversations that we're having are with the lens of providing feedback that is meant to be, helpful and not a hindrance, or not us calling anyone to the table in a way that's, giving them a scarlet letter or anything like that. We're trying to be collaborative and to improve the relationship. So that's our charter. That's the reason why we're here. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Mummy. Okay. Again, I'll circulate this for everyone to review, make sure I captured your comments and consolidated them probably accurately, but very valuable, rich discussion. Are we all good moving on to a couple of votes? Excellent. I think administratively, I'll ask first if anyone has any known discrepancies from the meeting minutes, because if not, we can vote to approve them all together. Does anyone want to
note that I made one change to the last set of meeting minutes, which was to add, I was missing a letter in Selena's last name. My apologies for that, but I corrected it. And so everything otherwise is the same.
Okay. Does anyone want to move to approve the meeting minutes from September, October, November?
I move to approve the group of meeting minutes with the noted amendment.
I'll
Wonderful.
second that.
Wonderful. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful. Meeting minutes are approved unanimously. Okay, the second and last vote take tonight, just to recap, we had the case in November that we heard involving the allegations were failure to investigate. And it was I think was ruled an overdose death. We reviewed, and the recommendations from Selena and I were to exonerate both officers for failure to investigate, having reviewed kind of all the steps that were taken at what time in the investigation, and understanding, the sentiment leading to the origination of the complaint. Very tragic circumstances, but we had an administrative vote at that time to adopt the investigation recommendations to exonerate both officers. And so before we move to a vote, does anyone have any questions or comments on that issue? Okay. Does somebody want to move to adopt the recommendations?
I'll move that we adopt the recommendation to exonerate both officers.
Second?
I'll second.
Wonderful. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No abstentions? Wonderful. Okay. It is 8:12. We will have 5 minutes for public comment to 8:17. I don't think we have any members of the public still on. We did at the beginning. I'll just check nope. Okay. Well, then I'm going to assume but we didn't receive any requests. So we're going to call that item done. And with that, we have addressed all of our meeting agenda items. So I'll give everyone one last minute in case anyone has a closing thought.
I do.
Yeah.
On the issue of families and youth, I was thinking about this. The only other thing I thought about is, the police do a lot of outreach with youth groups, and they may have some ideas of how to connect with families or youth groups or something like that. And shame on the PTA, let me just say. I'm just going to say shame on the PTA. But anyway, so that was my one thought. Maybe the police have, some organizations. That's it.
Good idea. Can I add one other thing? It would be great if everyone can review the dates for the whole year for the meetings, because I had 2 where I could only attend virtually and 1 I can't attend. And so I think we need to figure out if we have a quorum or if we need to move any dates as soon as possible. It would just make it a lot easier.
Okay. Before our next meeting, I will send another email about the schedule. I do think that since we don't have the same backlog and we don't expect to necessarily have 12 cases to review, we've reviewed 14 total now. 2 of them were in 2023. So last year we reviewed 12. I don't think we will have to do that. We have, when needed, met twice in a month in order to accommodate that. And that gives us a little bit more flexibility on how many all virtual meetings we have. But We can also schedule that for ones where we don't have a quorum. Again, it's okay if you can't make a meeting, but it's a lot easier if we know in advance so that we can plan around votes and topics. And we don't really want to have substantive discussions that require a vote with anyone missing. So excellent. Thank you. I'll circulate a couple more. Look out for emails from Mummy on the case review materials for February. That will be a heavy lift. Look for emails from me on case review reports that you'll have to review. Charles, I'll fill you in on that. That was just probably the only salient thing you missed at the beginning. And then we will see you on February 26th in person at the county building. Thanks, team.
Thank you
Have a good night.
all.
Bye,
Have a
everyone.
good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.